Good evening. Gosh, this is a friendly crowd. I'm glad we're all friends here. Is anybody not a friend here? Oh, yeah. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad y'all are here. And I'm really excited about Matt and Tim. I met them probably 8 or 9 years ago, back when I was writing for a website called House. I interviewed them for 2 articles, I think. Japanese Maples for Sun and Japanese Maples for Shade. And I was really impressed with their garden then. And they've really grown. We were talking over dinner about how much the business has grown. They have so many trees that you'll never find anywhere else. I think if there's like a candy stripe ginkgo, you guys probably have it, right? or a purple leaf hamamelis or something like that. So they have all kinds of cool stuff. They are fun, and they're brothers, and they don't hate each other. You know, my brother and I hate each other. They actually get along, and this is really a fun thing. So I will introduce it to who's going to talk first. Both of you. Tim and Matt.
We said we're brothers when we get along, but we do this fight mid thing, so just be. How many of you have been to one of our talks before? Anybody? This is great. We can use all the same jokes. This will work great. This will work. We're set up well. So I'm Matt, and this is my brother Tim, and we're the owners of MrMaple.com. We're a mail-order Japanese maple nursery. We do around 1,400 different varieties of Japanese maples, and we're just south of Hendersonville. We're in the East Flat Rock area, if you're familiar with that area.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I'm Tim, and we are mail order directly to your door. But the other cool thing about us is you can find us in a lot of fun places. Like you can find our Mr. Maple Friends group on Facebook. A lot of people get involved in that. But also, we do a new YouTube video every single day. Wow. So every single day, there's YouTube videos coming out.
So if you buy into this, if you're not like, that's enough of those guys, you cover every single day of the year.
And then on Sundays, we do a podcast. So we have a podcast, a weekly podcast. We've had some amazing people that we'll be interviewing really soon.
A famous Japanese maple nurseryman, Talon Buckholz, was recently on our podcast. We've had some really fun people. We're going to twist Jay's arm and do one soon.
We recently had the Grumpy Gardener, Seed Bender, and we try to get some really fun and exciting podcasts. Some podcasts we're just talking about how to grow Japanese maples, but then other ones some fun interviews to really get to know people and get to know what they like about Japanese maples.
Really, we're just big plant geeks, so we just make the content we want to see, whether everybody else is watching or not. We're like, today we're going to talk about Acer species, and everybody's like, oh, this is boring, but it's fun to us.
But you can find us on all major podcast platforms. So you can go to Alexa and say, hey, play the Mr. Maple podcast, and it'll pop up. Or you can find us on Pandora, go to the podcast section. iHeartRadio. So, I mean, there's so many different ways you can find us and listen to our podcast. But you can actually watch the video of it on YouTube as well, which is always fun when you see people's reactions and see them as they're talking.
The Talon Buckholz one was a lot of fun. He's a really famous nurseryman that's named, he would probably be like the Beatles if you were saying #1 hits. He's named 100 really cool trees that you probably know from the Ghost series to a lot of others.
Geisha Gone Wild, Japanese Princess.
A lot of plants we can mention today, but it was a really fun one to get him on camera and kind of talk to him about getting started in the nursery trade. So we like to cover that kind of stuff.
So if you've been to one of our talks before, this was before COVID, the nursery was probably me and Matt and probably about 4 or 5 other people. And if you talk to us now, we have a decent-sized crew. This is actually one of our recent birthday parties during lunch. We've got about 25 to 27 different people who work at our nursery now, and we stay swamped. And we couldn't be here doing things like this if it wasn't for them back at the nursery doing so much awesome stuff. Like they were getting out shipping today while we were on the road coming here today.
If you're in any like the Japanese maple groups or you're just a plant person, you probably know this guy in the corner. This is Brian Rule. He was one of our really good customers in Oklahoma and said, I'm tired of living in Oklahoma and I'd like to come work for you. So he now makes that video every single day. He moved out here from Oklahoma. Now he works at the nursery, and we've got more plant geeks getting involved all the time that like to talk about plants.
So let's get started on what y'all came here to hear about. We're talking about the 20 Japanese maples that you need for your garden. Now, we had to limit it down to 20. You know we've got 1,400 different varieties of Japanese maples. So we've got quite a few. And when they said 20 Japanese maples, I was like, man, that's going to be a really short presentation. And difficult to build.
So we compiled this list of some classics but also some new and interesting things. Because we actually, on our website, we list 10 new plants every Tuesday at 10. We have this 10 at 10 thing we do, and it's actually 20 plants. We call it 10 at 10 still, but we put 20 plants on every Tuesday at 10 a.m. That's how crazy we are. So it's kind of like insane, but we narrowed it down to some things you might have heard of, but some things you might have not heard of. So there's some really cool things in here as well that may be up and coming.
So we're going to start out with a red upright. Everybody loves having the red upright. When people think about red uprights in their garden, they often think of bloodgood. And bloodgood is a very awesome plant. The guy's last name was Bloodgood. And it was introduced as one of the very first Japanese maples in the nursery trade, but in the United States. But it's gotten watered down quite a bit. We do carry the original Bloodgood at our nursery. But there are some varieties that are improved upon, like Firefly.
Yeah, now everything we're going to be talking about here today is a grafted Japanese maple. We graft our trees because it's the best way to get a guaranteed clone of the parent plant. We use Tim and I as an example. We're brothers, but we don't look that much alike. And Japanese maples can be the exact same way. So if you grow Japanese maples from seed, some will look like the parent plant, but some will look completely different. So it's kind of a grab back there. Some will retain similar traits. So all these are grafted selections. And one of the best ways to think about that is kind of like breeds of dogs, because you kind of, if you're wanting to plant a Chihuahua, you don't want a Great Dane there in that spot. So you can kind of guide it to give you a little bit more guidance for what you're looking for. Now, Fireglow is one of our most popular upright reds, because it's in that medium size. That's an actual introduction from Italy. And you can see why it gets that Fireglow name. Really excellent, kind of a fiery red fall color as well.
Yeah, and this is such a great plant. I love this plant because it's so unique in the fact that this one, if you plant where it gets morning sun or afternoon sun hitting it, it glows. And that's where it gets the name of Fireglow. People think of Japanese maples being from Japan. This is actually a selection from Italy. Japanese maples are a global phenomenon, and people love them all around the world. But Fireglow itself is so unique because it really gets that glowing effect when morning sun or afternoon sun hits it. And so when you're siding this one, put it somewhere where it gets some sunlight hitting it so you can really get that glowing effect. What it does is it's got an orange red to the back side of the leaf. This develops with some sunlight, which really gives that extra glowing effect on Fireglow.
And you're actually going to hold that red much later into the season than some of the things like Bloodgood. Bloodgood's a great plant, like Tim was saying. It was actually the gentleman's last name. We talk about like kind of what's in a name sometimes, and people think of Bloodgood. People come to the nursery and say, I want a blood grade, a true blood, a good blood. Like I've heard it all. But Bloodgood's a classic tree for a reason. It kind of encapsulates what people think of with a Japanese maple. And often people's entryway into Japanese maples are going to be red uprights and lace leaves. And so we picked the red upright here, something maybe not Bloodgood, but an entryway point, and then we get you into all the crazy stuff later.
Another reason I like Fireglow too is it's a good mid-sized tree. So this is a tree that in 15 years will be 10 to 12 feet, and it will grow larger than that over time, but it is a little slower growing than Bloodgood. So it fits in a lot of smaller yards.
One thing we like to tell people too, I think at maturity can be a fake term people use. So you'll see Japanese maples. I was watching a gardening video the other day, and this lady was talking about this new cultivar that's from Europe, and she said mature height is between 3 to 15 feet. And I was like, oh, that's 3 to 15 feet tall, 3 to 15 feet wide. And I was like, a really popular channel. I'm like, that's way too long a perimeter. It's like, that makes no sense. So we try to give you the most honest answer with sizes. So what we do, instead of saying at maturity as a catch-all term, we say like in 10 or 15 years, this is what you should expect as a normal growth rate. And that's one of the best and most honest answers. We were on a Japanese TV show. We got to see a 400-year-old Japanese maple. So the truth of the matter is a happy tree is going to outlive us all. A grafted Japanese maple should live to be over 100 years old.
So I saw someone as I was running upstairs coming around the back, and they said, I've got more yellow in my garden than you do. If you know anything about my videos, I always talk about the color yellow. And this is another selection from Italy, from this Ghirardelli nursery, the same nursery that introduced Fireglow. They introduced Eastern Palmatum Summer Gold.
So I don't encourage this, but our YouTube channel's had a drinking game now where when Tim starts talking about yellow, you're just tapped out. Because every time Tim says plant a yellow plant, like if you drink, you're done. But he's going to talk about yellow all day. But an amazing selection. Now, one of the things I love about Summer Gold, this is a yellow that can handle a little bit more sun. So I've actually seen this doing great in zone 8B. You can put this in a heavy sun exposure. Most of the time in general, the more yellow, the more late day shade you're going to need. This is actually another selection from Italy. Not the chocolate maker, but this is from Ghirardelli Nursery in Italy. And a really interesting nursery. It's got a lot of cool plants. This whole series of yellows they do are very interesting. Summer gold being one of the better ones for that heat tolerance. So you could put this in a good bit of sun. And I've seen it grow in full sun in Atlanta and not skipping a beat. So
Now,
excellent plant.
young plants make it a little burn as they're getting established, but once it's established, this is one of the most heat tolerant yellows. And I'll say one of the most, we're saving the best for last. So when we get to number 20, that's one of the most heat tolerant yellows you could possibly get. But this is the most heat tolerant, one of the most heat tolerant Eastern palmatums that's on the market today.
Excellent fall color too. Often with summer gold, you're going to keep that yellow light into the summer pretty well as well. Anything can green up a little bit right before the fall color. It's when the chlorophyll is the highest in the plant. So truthfully, anything can get some green in, especially in a lot of sun late. But this one gets a really nice pink red also right as the fall color gets going. So it's a really nice fall color too.
So we love contrast at our nursery. When we design gardens or put plants out in the landscape, it's all about flash and all. And for us, it's about contrasting starkly with what you have next to it. And so I like to pair something like summer gold with purple ghost, because purple ghost can give you some of these unreal colors of this lavender purple to fuchsia purple. And the tree that you see on the left right there, right here on the far left, is the same tree that's right there. There's just different years. And so some years you can get an unreal lavender shades of purple ghost to those fuchsia purples. This one's truly remarkable and is one of the most unusual maples out there on the market.
So let me know if any of you have seen this scam going on online where it's like eBay, or you'll see it on Amazon, they're like, buy these blue seeds for this blue Japanese maple. And they have this perfectly, that's like the color of my shirt, right? It's like this tinted, amazing. So there's no blue Japanese maples. We actually, video's doing great on this. I have a customer who bought it, and you get like some squash seeds. So you might get some squash from China. I don't know what you get out of that. It looked like squash to me. But we often tell people, you can't, that's not real, but this actually is real. You can have this. This is non-Photoshop. This is an actual pigment that exists in Japanese maples. Blue, not quite yet, but purple, yes, that can be achieved.
I have also seen where they'll take regular Japanese maple seed, run it through a microwave so it kills it, so people can't come up, but then they'll put it in blue food coloring so people think that it's going to come up.
Blue seed. It's like this color.
So,
yeah, so there's no blue ones. I always like to let PSA know.
But this is
if you buy blue seed, we won't make fun of you today, but there was a time, it's kind of died down. There was a time where we got a couple calls a month for blue Japanese maples, and they're like, no, I've seen the picture. And they send you a picture of like this perfect bonsai, but the problem is the grass is blue, the pot's blue. Like, I don't know, you might want to think about this blue grass in the picture as well.
So Jim Putnam was at our nursery about 2 weeks ago, and he made me say, what is my favorite Japanese maple for one of his videos? And that's a really difficult thing to say. And one of my favorites is Mikawa Yatsubusa. This is one of our favorites by far, and this one just has a tightly layering habit, that shingle-like appearance, and it's just a small little dwarf that if you have a collection of Japanese maples, this one always stands out. If you don't have a collection of Japanese maples, this is a great first because it's pretty bulletproof out in the landscape and garden. Makes a great container plant, but is an all-around amazing tree.
Yeah, people love this one because it has that tight shingled layering. It kind of makes a bonsai-esque look naturally there in the landscape. Mikawa is typically 4 to 5 feet tall, even in a 15-year period, so it's very nice and dense. We do have a 40-year-old one in the nursery we like to show people because it's like 12 feet. It's one of the biggest ones I've ever seen. But a really unique plant. Now, this one is one of our favorite trees to look through the seedlings from because we go through some unique variations of this now. But whenever we ask nurserymen and women what one of their favorite trees are, this is one of our most popular answers is Mikawa Yatsubusa. And super durable. It's always popular for container culture, for bonsai, or in the landscape. And this was another one that can go in a good bit of sun up to zone 8.
And Matt and I are both past presidents of the North American branch of the Maple Society. When Matt was president of the Maple Society, he actually, maybe even before he was the president, he recommended starting the Maple of the Year program with the North American Maple Society. And Mikawa Yatsubusa was the very first Maple of the Year in 2014. So it's becoming more and more popular. The thing that's difficult about this plant is it has really tight nodes in between the leaves. That also makes it really difficult to produce. And so for that reason, it's often something you don't see at a lot of local garden centers. But at our nursery, we try to keep several 100 or 1,000 in stock.
It's one of the most popular trees, but it's a great turnaround. In 10 years you get something this big. So it's not something that you're mass producing massive sizes up quickly because of its slower growth rate. When you graft this, you actually have to cut through the buds. So it's kind of tricky. It's kind of an acquired one to learn to produce. But very, very unique plant, very easy to grow.
So next up, we're going to talk about one of the talent buckles as introductions. This is Acer palmatum Geisha gone wild. This was found as a sport on the cultivar Geisha, and hence, since it was a mutated sport, it became Geisha gone wild.
Excellent plant. This is a nice, very bright pink on red. This will give you a ton of spring interest. It's a really nice mid-size in that like 6 to 8 foot size range. Very heat tolerant for a pink. Normally the more pink, the more late day shade you need. This one does fairly well in some sunlight. It is a reoccurring sport, so if you've seen the cultivar Shiraz, that is actually a tree that originated in New Zealand with very, very similar traits. So Geisha continues to throw the sport. We've actually found it at our nursery, but we didn't need a third one, so we didn't name it. But I have seen the sport reoccur again off Geisha. But Geisha gone wild is an excellent tree. Really nice vase shape overall to it. This one in the middle there is at one of our display gardens. And you can just get some unreal shades of really bright pink. One of my favorite times is midsummer, where you kind of get a little bit more green going on in there. So you really get some interesting contrast going on in with itself.
And again, when Matt says that 6 to 8 foot, we're talking about that 10-year range. This is a plant that is just electric on its color. We're talking about some maples that are just amazing with color out in the landscape. I mean, you go from that yellow to summer gold to the purple ghost to Geisha gone wild. I mean, that's just some unreal colors to get on something that's not flowering. And it's amazing that how much color Japanese maples can provide.
Now, this is when we were talking about at dinner, Acer palmatum ukigumo. This is a tree that can have bright whites in it. Now, I let people know often up front with this one, there are many seasons this tree will leaf out greener. It's not always consistently white. I went and visited a friend in Toulouse, and he said, oh, my ukigumo is always white. It never turns white. Well, the one year I went, I guess it was the off year because it was green. So this one can be very green some springs. It will surprise you. You'll go out there some years and it will be starkly white. But there are some seasons where you get a little bit more green in it. The trick to getting the best color in this one is leafing out very slowly. So you need to put it in areas where it's going to be in more heavily shaded areas, in a cooler spot in the garden. The slower your spring is on this one, typically the more white and the better the variegation.
And again, this one is Acer palmatum ukigumo, known as the floating clouds maple. Like Matt said, I like to plant this tree as a fall color interest maple because this thing has some amazing fall color, whether it's white in the spring or not. And then in the years that it leaves out slowly, when the environment's right and you get that super white, you get something extra in the spring that really takes over the garden.
This is a really cool one, Acer palmatum rikuzen shidari. So this is one that we've kind of helped popularize. Now, rikuzen shidari is a large weeping form. So some of y'all may be familiar with ryusin. This is going to have a similar shape to ryusin, but a leaf shape the size of like osakazuki or hogyoku. So it has a very big, full leaf. A really unique story behind this one as well.
So Yutaka Tanaka at Tsukasa Maple is an amazing friend of ours. We got to go visit with him in Japan and sit down and talk with him and learn the stories behind the plants. And that's something that's just unreal, sitting there with an interpreter so you can ask questions and learn the stories behind the trees.
We were heartbroken the first time we went to visit him because we were literally walking onto the plane in Japan. We got an email from Yutaka Tanaka and he said, I'm sorry, but I won't be able to visit with you this trip. We're like, oh man, like he was one of the main nurseries we wanted to go visit. And it wasn't that he didn't want to see us. Another nursery we were visiting had a translator, and he had said, well, if I can't provide a translator, it wouldn't make any sense. And so when we visited with Yano-san, we said, please ask Yutaka Tanaka if we provide a translator, if we may still come. And oh my gosh, he was so gracious. He sat down and went through diagrams of, this is why I named this, and so much interesting information that you don't really learn unless you're talking to somebody that knows all the kind of cultural implications of how a tree was named. We looked forever for what some things mean, and you're never going to understand unless somebody explains it that speaks the horticultural language as well as the Japanese language to be able to explain it.
So we've hyped up the story a little bit, but Yutaka Tanaka went to this temple where this tree was, and he said, may I get cuttings from this tree? And the monk at the temple said, no, you cannot touch the tree. Well, the guy at the temple wasn't paying attention, and Yutaka Tanaka went up and grabbed cuttings from the tree.
So Dr. Creek says if you have 10 horticulturalists in a room, you have 10 thieves. This is kind of a story about that kind of thing.
But
I don't feel bad sharing the story because it does have a good ending.
the tsunami hit, and the original tree was washed away. The tree didn't exist anymore. And Yataka Tanaka showed up at the temple and said, I know you didn't want to share this with me, but here, and he gave him back a really large tree, very similar size to this one here, and said, I want this to be back at the temple. And
He took it a little step further. He was like, this is what happens when you share. So,
exactly.
so he was
This is
teaching
the
everybody a
lesson.
lesson.
Let's share.
But really cool story behind it. Really fun tree. Huge, huge leaf to this one. Again, very uniquely different fall color. When we're used to, you're going to kind of have more of an orange red. This one getting to really nice yellows. And again, the leaf, the picture doesn't really do it justice. For Ryusen, you're talking about a leaf shaped like this. With the Rikuzen shidari, it's not uncommon to have some really nice size foliage to it. So it's quite unique in its weeping habit as well.
Have any of y'all saw the videos of people making momiji tempura in Japan? Making tempura out of and eating fried maple leaves. It became like a sensational hit on the Real Big Story on YouTube, covered it.
Every year I'll get tagged in the story and they're like, hey, have you seen this? And there's this one specific lady in this story and she's there in Mino and she deep fries maple leaves and then you eat the cookie. But the maple leaf, you kind of dip it in so much sugar and it sits in so much sugar and salt that there's no maple taste left. It's really just the shape, but they taste great.
But we actually got to make maple tempura with the lady who's so famous for this at Menlo Park. And when we were making maple tempura with her, she let us know that the leaves that turn to the yellow in the fall are what you make the momiji tempura out of because they don't taste bitter. A lot of the red that you see in fall color makes the maple taste bitter. And so something like Rikuzen shidari with that large leaf and the yellow fall color is excellent if you ever want to make some fried maple leaves.
We've got to do a lot of fun things. We got an email one time. We were literally speaking to the 40 years of J.C. Ralston and it said, would you like to go to Japan, ? And I'm like, that sounds like spam. Like, yeah, sure. And he'd like there's a Saudi prince that wants my credit card number. Well, Tim replied right away, like, yes. So we got to go and be on a Japanese TV show. It's called Nippo Nikki Tai. And it essentially means, like, who wants to come to Japan? And we got to do this really cool trip. They took us to Mino. I don't know if you ever watched Japanese TV, but it's like Benny Hill level camping. Like, it's like crazy camping. And so it was funny because we made maple tempura at our house. And so I was to screw it up really bad.
And so
go and learn how to do it correctly.
I can't cook. So let's start with that. So Matt said, if you want someone to screw it up really badly, let Tim do it.
So he goes and gets like japonicum leaves and pours like pancake mix on it. And I bought into it and it's like, and then it cuts to us in Japan, learning to make maple cookies the right way. Maybe we'll make that a fall open house thing where we make some momiji tempura for everybody.
So this is a really cool introduction called Easter Pomade on Wave Leaf. Now this one doesn't even do it justice because you can't see this glossy sheen that this tree has on the leaf.
Yeah, this was an introduction by our friend Talon Buchholz we mentioned that we did the interview with. Talon's come up with so many different cool trees. This one he accidentally named, so he didn't mean to name this one. He had it as a seedling there, and he was just going to sell it off as a seedling and not graft it. And like many nurserymen, when everybody kept coming up to him and going, I want this one, he went, wait a second. Maybe I better not put this one on the sales block. Maybe I better graft it. So he took it back and looked at it a little bit differently and started to produce it. And it's a really fun one. It's basically a variation of that purple ghost. And like Tim was saying, the spring color especially has a very glossy sheen to it, which is really unique.
Yeah, the leaf just shines. And so everyone's attracted to it because it looks extra showy because of that. And the photos can't capture that. And that's something you just have to see in person because every time I try to photograph it, you can't capture that glossy sheen to this plant that makes it so unique and special when you're seeing it in person.
Now this is a good example, go back to that last one, of reticulated variegation. So you see that like etching you get throughout every leaf. We consider this like reticulated variegation in Japanese maples. And so, very popular style variegation here. There's a whole, Talon's accused of naming everything Ghost, but he's actually moved on from Ghost. And so a lot of people refer to this as Ghost style variegation because the Ghost series was so popular. But in Europe, you'd recall this like reticulatum group for that kind of interesting etching, but it just looks like each little leaf was outlined for variegation.
So next up, we've got a tree that's one of the harbingers of spring in the garden. This is a plant that I love. It's a plant that just, in the springtime, it's like a flowering shrub almost. I mean, it's a big tree, but this thing leaves out in the spring with some bright oranges. It's one of the very first trees to leaf out in the spring, so when you see this, you always get excited because spring's right around the corner. And after that, it goes to some really nice yellows, and then to a solid green, some really nice oranges to reds in the fall. But as an overall, it's just a great upright Japanese maple.
Yeah, fairly fast grower to a foot and a half of growth a year on this one. Giving it some late day shade, you'll actually hold the yellow later into the season. Unlike summer gold, it does wash out a little bit more in the sun. So giving it some late day protection, you can hold some of those spring colors later. It's often one you have to watch out for just a little bit because those early spring frosts, it's normally the very first tree to leaf out. And for that reason too, it's very popular for bonsai for the small, bright yellow foliage.
It will trick you though, because every year we've got a really large one in our display garden. And it's the very first tree to leaf out. And when we have those early spring frosts and we're covering all the other Japanese maples, there's no way, it's too big to cover. And it rarely ever gets any damage because when the trees are in those early stages of leafing out, there's something, my dad always says they have antifreeze in their leaves. And Katsura is one that definitely has some antifreeze in its leaf, per se, whenever it's leafing out because it is pretty hard.
Excellent classic Japanese maple though. This is a newer selection, another one by our friend Talon Buck called Celebration. Think of this almost as the purple ghost, but the bright pink variegation style of that. So this one's more of a bright pink on that. Talon, who's world famous for maple, said this might be the best tree I've ever introduced when he gave it to us originally. We've been very fortunate to trade with him and get a lot of his cultivars very early on. Well, when he said this might be my best one we've ever done, we went, okay, we're going to produce 1 million of them. So we dove all in on this one, but excellent tree, and it's been one that the market's exceeded our ability to produce. It's always in high demand for this bright pink coloration.
Yeah, I love this tree because again, I like color, I like flair, and this one does it for sure. The springtime when this one has those super pink colors in the spring, I mean, it's outrageous. And then it goes to fades to like a green faded reticulation, but then it has pink red new growth again during the summer. And so all throughout the season, this one just keeps popping off color. It's pretty spectacular when it comes to just those super spring colors.
So this is a fairly new selection. This is one called Acer Shirasalum Sunny. Most of your newer Acer Shirasalums are like full moon style maples. Most of the really cool ones are actually hybrids with palmatum. That's how you get so many interesting variations going on these. This is actually a seedling from Acer Shirasalum Jordan. So if you've ever seen the cultivar Jordan, Sunny was selected because of this neon orange spring color. So it really leaves out some really nice orange into that yellow veining too.
And then it transforms from that orange to yellow. So you know I love yellow. This one's pretty awesome. It's almost like it has the spring interest of almost like Katsura on a full moon leaf, and then goes into the color patterns of Jordan. It needs some protection from the hot afternoon sun, I believe. I mean, this is a newer selection that really hasn't been trialed a lot in a lot of gardens, but I would give it protection from the hot afternoon sun. But the colors on this are unreal. It's one of the most colorful full moon maples with this amazing spring color, could then go into this bright,
Got a really nice
yellow.
size leaf on this as well. So when you're looking at this one, leaves, on I would say even a 5 to 6 foot tree are about this size. So it's got quite nice size foliage. You're definitely getting some palmatum influence into that Acer Shirasalum, but some great colors. It's going to have similar growth rate to Jordan in that it gets out there a foot to a foot and a half of growth a year, but you really get some really spectacular early spring orange in this one. If you can give this tree early morning sun, late day shade, you can kind of enhance that like orangey, marmalade color and drag that later into the season, which has been really nice.
So we're going to start talking about a few different ones. We might even talk about some of the ones that we've introduced. This is actually one we've introduced. This is one called Acer palmatum Fountain of Youth. Now, I love this plant, and the reason we like this plant is because if you're familiar with the Ryusen style Japanese maple that is heavily cascading and pendulous, we went through a lot of heavily cascading and pendulous seedlings, and this one was really unusual because while all the rest of them had that Ryusen style leaf, this one had a more divided leaf.
So we didn't tell you all about our place. Our dad actually started our nursery, and we call our introductions the Area 51 collection. So if you get a tree that it's from the Area 51 collection. And that came about because we would be gone to a garden club, gone to a garden show, and we would return home and Dad would say, guess what, guys, I sold a tree. And we'd be like, which one? Oh, no. And it would be, the thing we were evaluating, there was one of. So that quickly became the Area 51 area where nobody comes in or out. And so all of our introductions go into one nice little hidden spot until we can decide whether they're actually going to get introduced or not. But very rarely do you ever see a tree that is a broom mutation as well as a variegated mutation. So this was found as a witch's broom on the cultivar Benny Shishahinga, which is a bright pink form. It's actually our MrMaple symbol. It's my mom's favorite tree, so MrMaple is what people call my dad, and we've got mom in there for the Benny Shishahinga. And really cool tree though, because it's actually a broom and variegated. So two things you don't see happen a lot. We thought of two other examples. There's a Ginkgo biloba Peve Maribo, and then Sherman's Nord. But other than that, I couldn't think of any other trees that were a broom genetic mutation and variegated. So it's kind of an oddball in that. We did a whole video on Japanese maple weirdos, which people seem to like that title. But this was one of the extreme weirdos because we were talking about us because we're so crazy about maples. But this one kind of makes that more rounded ball shape. So it's going to be more of like a 4x4 globular shape, but then also with that pink variegation in there.
And Matt has two daughters, and when we were naming this, they were all about princesses. And so Matt's like, why don't we name something Pink Princess? And since this one really has some of that pink colors in the spring, we thought for sure this would be a great tree for that name. And this has been a tree that's been great for containers. It's very multi-stemming. It's vigorous at a young age, so it shoots out there and then densens up, which is really unusual because we had another person who had a nursery that had bought one of these from us, and when I went and looked at her website, she said, a more vigorous form of Benny Shishahinga. And I'm like, more vigorous form? She had only had it for a few years, and basically this plant takes off at an early age and then starts densening up, where Benny Shishahinga stretches out and doesn't get a lot of side branching to it. So this was really makes a nice little ball for containers out in the landscape and gives you everything you love about Benny Shishahinga, and it's been proven to be a little more stable than Benny Shishahinga as well. Often Benny Shishahinga is a variety that can throw off a lot of reversions. You'd have to go out and prune off midsummer.
This one, when it first leaves out, has a lot of very intense bright pink, and then it kind of fades to more of a pink with like almost later summer, like a cream on mint coloration. Very popular for that container garden because of its smaller size. Sometimes when we come out with new trees, it takes a while. Like people are like, really? Is that really what it does? And then after people start to see people share it and get out there more, it starts to get really popular. But this was one of those ones when we first introduced it, people were like, is that really a variegated witch's broom? I don't know if that could exist. So it took a second for people to kind of warm up to it.
So next up we've got Easter Pomatum Strawberry Spring. So while we had that pink red with Celebration, this is the reticulated type with that baby pink. And it's the most baby pink of any of the types in the early spring.
Yeah, heavily reticulated baiting on this one again. Strawberry Spring it's one of those trees that photos don't do it justice either. If we're open in the early spring and people see this one when it's in leaf, they sell out right away just because it's so crazy looking. This is late summer growth in the far corner over here, so you can kind of see that late summer new growth splash is really intense as well.
And that middle color is what it fades to after that spring baby pink to that cream green. And the color changes this one goes just makes this Japanese maple so spectacular. The reason people love Japanese maples often is because of the changes throughout the seasons. The fact that you get an amazing spring color, the fact that you get something unique during the summer, and then the fact that then you get some fall color that comes behind it. Then they drop the leaves, and then the anticipation for spring starts all over again.
Conifer people don't have any patience. You gotta appreciate each step. I'm kidding. But we do a lot of conifers too. But you gotta appreciate the steps. One thing I love about Japanese maples is that hopeful anticipation of spring. And this one's one that puts on just an amazing display there in the spring garden.
So this is one that's quickly becoming one of our favorites, and the favorites of a lot of our employees. This is Acer Shirasawa Bronze Age. And in the springtime, you see exactly why this plant gets the name Bronze Age. It really adds something to this. It really has a regal appearance with some really nice bronze colors. But the thing that really makes this tree show off, it's got some good summer colors and new flushes, but the reason our employees love this plant is the fall colors. This thing gives a consistent fall color almost every year, even in a 1 gallon, and the fall colors just range from really nice yellows, and then as those yellows hold on later in the season, they get some oranges in them as well. So you get some yellows infused with orange. I mean, it's spectacular.
We create Plant Geeks at our place. We have a really good employee discount, and I was telling you about the 10 of 10, so we had the 10 of 10 set up. So every Tuesday at 10, we're releasing new plants. We're like, great, we've got this huge set of Bronze Age, and these are going on the website next Tuesday. And then we start getting into fall color, and we're like, hey, let's release that set. And I'm like, dang, we only got like 20 of them. What happened? So it's like, I thought it was a big set. Everybody had bought like 2 of them. So we went down in numbers right away. So it was one that was a employee favorite there for sure, especially in fall color. I love it for that new growth splash, especially in the summer. You kind of get like the middle picture is very indicative of summer where you kind of get this flash over top of it. I think it makes a really fun pairing with moonrise. If you've ever seen Acer Shirosao on a moonrise, it's kind of a yellow with apricot pink new growth. And this kind of gives you an interesting contrast to that.
And it was interesting talking to Talon about this plant because he said, you know, it just struck my fancy and I really liked it one day. And I'm really glad that I propagated it because he said that it now is one of his wife's favorite Japanese maples at his nursery. And he was like, you know, if I saw that at another time, it might not have hit me like it did. But as soon as we started growing, it quickly became one of our favorites. And we started producing the hound out of it because this is such a cool plant that gives you a lot of fun color changes.
So this is a really interesting tree that we named our nursery. This is probably my favorite of the reticulated forms. This is Acer palmatum Firefly. Now we talked about how we do that 5 and 7 rule where we name a tree. So basically if we're gonna graft a tree, if we're gonna propagate it, we go ahead and put a name on it. Because nothing annoys me more than Acer palmatum 24387 being in the tray. Like, this is nuts. Like you'll see that sometimes on cultivar lists. It's like Acer japonicum 6910 or something like that. And you're like, no, please put a name on this. This is a great plant. We're killing it with this awful name. And so we'll put a name on it if we're going to propagate it, because if it gets out there under the wrong name, we want it to know what it is, one. Now, we did this one in reverse. So we actually had a wholesale distributor that sent us some plants, and we got this under the name Moonfire. Moonfire is a great plant. It's going to be very similar to that Fireglow we talked about at first. It's an upright red, classic Dick Wolf introduction who...
Been introduced since 1980. In the 1980s.
It's been around a minute. And so I was like, Tim, go check this out. Like, we got like a bunch of these. None of these look like Moonfire, right? And so basically we set about finding out what we had. And so for the next 5 years, we named the 5 closest things to it.
Set up in the greenhouse next to it.
Yeah, and so we would shift trees around. We say, hey, is it similar to this? And then because of that, we kept going back and taking pictures of it. And we're like, this is the craziest thing. It looks like nothing I've ever seen. And so eventually we called the gentleman and we said, what did we get as Moonfire? They said, oh, my friend named it Moonfire, but we've never sold it. Y'all were the first ones to get it. And we said, well, and that guy passed away. He said, well, if you think it's nice, why don't you evaluate it and put a name on it? And so while Moonfire was already out there in the trade, this became Acer palmatum Firefly. And it's been one of our most popular trees we put a name on. Now, we didn't evaluate it. That gentleman found it and propagated it for those traits, but we actually got to name it. And just a really fun plant. It looks different every single season when you're photographing it, too.
When you realize that you sell somebody a 1-gallon plant, and there's 10 different people in our Facebook group who are posting the changes throughout the seasons of that 1-gallon plant because they're so enamored with it, you realize you've got a pretty good plant. Mm-hmm. And Matt and I, once I told him that, this isn't Moonfire, and he's like, yeah, it is. And then I basically said, there's a tree that's been in their shirt for so long, we got to put a name on it. Firefly just struck us because Matt and I would go to garden shows, and while we were traveling on the road to garden shows, we'd make long lists of plant names. And
then we find the plant we like for that name.
Then we find the plant we like for that name. And this hit so well on the head with this plant because of how this tree just lights up with.
So we introduced this one, but by reverse. We didn't mean to. Kind of fell in our lap. Lillian's Jewel. Now, this is one of the most striking variegated forms here.
And this is Acer palmatum, by the way. I took one of our other presentations and changed a lot of the plants in it to make it really fit for what we're talking about here. And I had a variegated Pubi palmatum on this before. So
this is actually Acer palmatum. This is one of the most strongly variegated forms of that pink on red variegation.
Yeah.
I grow rainbow sometimes. I always let people know you have to prune rainbow for color and not for shape. So if you have an all red branch on rainbow, you have to just chop that out because it's never going to come back to this style variegation. And if I graft 200 rainbows, 50% of them are going to be all red, 50% of them are going to be pink on red. Now with Lillian's Jewel, if we graft 200 of them, we may have 1 or 2 that are reverted, but it's one of the most stable pink on reds by far. It's a great plant. It's getting out there more. You'll see people incorrectly sell this as Little Annie's Jewel or Extravaganza, but Little Annie's Jewel is the correct name there. Yeah,
it's getting around Europe as Extravaganza. Someone took Lillian's Jewel and put the name Extravaganza on it. But this is one of the best pink on red variegation types of this unique style where you see this mottled type variegation all throughout the leaf, on a red Japanese maple. It's been the holy grail. I mean, everybody has always wanted a stable form of this. There's a lot of varieties out there like Fujinami Nishiki, Tama Nishiki, Rainbow, and none of them are as stable as Lillian's Jewel. The other thing that's been pretty unusual about this plant is this plant can handle a lot of sun. One of our good friends, Richard Bomar, had this growing in full sun in Simpsonville, South Carolina, and this tree was doing fantastic for him. And he actually had the second one. We had the first and second ones of this being released in the nursery trade. Jonathan Savage was named after his daughter. Dale Locks was his grandfather, and Matt and I traded and sent them plants constantly, getting in their good graces, so that when they released this plant, Matt and I bought a plane ticket to Oregon, flew out there, and we were the very first people to buy this plant to start making it available at our nursery.
We started selling this tree probably in like 2010 or something, and I don't know if you ever were on eBay back in the day, but we used to be the Maple Mafia on eBay. It was a joke. A friend called us the Maple Mafia because we had everything. So we would sell these on eBay, and people would bid these up, and they would sell for like $200 for like a line, sometimes even more. So it was very popular. We brought the price down by like producing tons of them now, but always very, very popular. So this is when Jim Putnam came to our nursery, he asked me what my favorite maple was, and I got extra credit because I named this after my wife. So this one's Hot Blonde. So I picked my wife's favorite tree on purpose so that I stayed in her good graces. Yeah. This is an Acer liviarum. So it's basically a Chinese maple crossed with a Japanese maple. Now the reason why we were selecting from Chinese maples is because basically we gave this Japanese maple superpowers. It comes from a much hotter region, and this can actually handle a ton of sun and is very fast growing. So we're getting some of those better traits from that Acer liviarum and putting them into essentially what looks like a Japanese maple for most people.
We've often carried Acer olivarandum, the straight species, and people from Texas just love it because it grows fast, gives them good fall color, and can handle high heat. Well, olivarandum Hot Blonde is a hybrid that we found as a chance seedling that has all of that, but then is yellow. And this tree just gives some unreal colors throughout the seasons. The middle photo is summer flushes during the summer, over top of the yellow down below. And then the fall color is electric with that bright red. But like Matt talked about the superpowers, we've got customers with this in Bishopville, South Carolina, in full sun, and the plant is thriving and doing fantastic. And as a yellow, that stands out. I mean, with more yellow, with more sunlight, this tree gets more and more yellow. And this tree wants sunlight. It's not like a plant that can handle the sunlight. This is a maple hybrid, a Japanese maple hybrid that wants the sunlight.
We're probably goofy for not patenting this one. We had a lot of interest in Europe and from different places in America. We never patented a plant. We just decided to get it out there because we like for our plants to be produced. So sometimes if you patent one, it may disappear because nobody ever gets to produce it in the trade. So like we started out as a small backyard nursery, and we're still a small nursery, but we would produce plants that weren't patented because we couldn't afford to play plant patents or didn't get approved for them. And so we always are kind of like, I don't really want to patent it and go through all that. So we didn't, but it's one we probably could have. It's a very fast grower at typically 1.5 foot of growth a year. And it's we actually do a whole heat seeker series now. So we've actually selected other plants in this hot series. Hot Blonde was the first of that group, but we're selecting more plants for those enhanced high heat Acer liviarum qualities.
And this is just a plant that just strikes my fancy every time I look at it. Because if you look at it, we've got the yellow, but then we've got that thin red border around the edge. You've got the new growth flushes that are starting to come out that have some of that red border, that red to them as well. And then the fact that this makes a tree that grows fairly fast. We're talking, once this is established in the landscape, we're talking 15, 16 inches of growth in a year. For a Japanese maple hybrid, that's pretty amazing. And so you get some amazing fall color too, like we talked about. That fall color in the greenhouse has lasted for almost a month for us before, in the cold frames. And that stands out in itself too, because there's not many Japanese maples that can hold that long in our greenhouse setting because of you're in super high heat and high humidity. And often that'll just take out the fall color in our cold frame setting. And the fact that this one can do that really shows that it's going to be a great tree for the landscape. I think when Jim was at our nursery, our nursery was in perfect fall color. And Matt shot in front of it, and it was just, it's
It's
unique.
really a bright pink red almost. It's almost a bright pink red. It's one of the things we like about this one. We've since developed a hot sauce, which is a red, and a hot tamale, which is like a pink. So we've been
That's right.
expanding our Heat Seeker series.
We also have hot chicken and hot rod. So some other fun ones in that series. The hot rod has yellow bark. The hot chicken has an angel feather type leaf structure, sessile almost like Hagoromo, if you're all familiar with that.
Those were seedlings collected in Japan that were from Lacey Olivier.
So
Also interesting traits. So we're always looking at developing new things. We don't name too many things in our nursery, but we like to kind of experiment with rare and unusual stuff. And we often like to look through things that we think can enhance. So this is our whole Nichols family here. You see my wife there, and Tim, and then mom and dad and Glenn and Vivian are in the middle, so that's our aunt and uncle in the middle. I often tell people, if you skip the next one here, Talon said something funny the other day. Somebody asked him if he was a plant breeder, and he said, the only thing I've ever bred are my kids. So we didn't come up with anything great, but these are my best introductions here. This is Carolina, Tinsley, and Hicks. And Hicks just turned 7 months old last week. So yeah, those are some of our better ones we've named there. We'll open it up for questions about anything. And we talked about Japanese maples. We grow over 150 varieties of ginkgo trees. We grow several thousand conifers in our nursery. We grow a lot of Rhodea japonica. We do a little bit of everything. Maples are what we're known for. It was definitely what we started out as. Our dad did this nursery as a hobby, and he basically set at tailgate markets, and then we stole his hobby and took away his way to put gas in the boat and turned it into a business. And he said, you guys are taking all the fun out of it, making it work. And we said, okay, good. And then we just kept growing from there. So.